Hi, I'm Mrs. S, and today's lesson is on circle graphs, or by any other name, pie charts. Circle graphs represent all of the data, 100% of it, in a pie chart or circle. Each section or wedge represents a portion or part of the data. And you must remember that all parts or sections added together must always equal 100%. So we have an example here of an average teenager's day. In an average day for a teenager, 42% of his time is spent sleeping, 33% of the time is spent in school, and 25% of time is spent doing other stuff. If you add these together, 42, plus 33 plus 25, you get 100% of a day. We can take this information and convert those percentages to numbers because we all know there's 24 hours in a day. So first we would change the percentages, 42, 33, and 25, into decimals and then multiply those decimals by 24 hours in a day. So pause the tape here, take a minute and do it before we reveal the answers. Once the math is done, we reveal our answers, and you see a lot of numbers. 24 times 0.42 is 10.08, rounded to 10 hours a day is spent sleeping. 24 times 0.33 is 7.92, or rounded 8 hours is spent at school, and other stuff accounts for 6 hours of a day. So now when we're getting ready to draw a circle graph, let's call this person, this average teenager, John. And we need to figure out how much time, or we're trying to draw our own circle graph of the time spent in John's day. He spends 10 hours a day sleeping, 8 hours a day in school, and 6 hours a day doing stuff. The first thing we have to do is fill out a chart that expresses the hours as a fraction, and then simplify those fractions to lowest terms. You can see the chart speaks for itself. 10/24 sleeping, 8/24 of his time spent in school, 6/24 of his time doing other stuff. If you were to add those fractions, which we can do easily because of like denominators, we can see that 10 plus 8 is 18, plus 6 is 24/24, or 1, which would always be the case there. Now we can see some of these, or all of these fractions actually can be simplified or put in lowest terms. You need a refresher to decide how to do that. Let's take a look. There are several ways to find a GCF. And as you know, to go from lowest terms, or to go from a fraction into lowest terms, you need to first find the GCF. One way you've learned to do that is to just list the factors. So if we have the fraction 10/24, we can easily see that can be simplified because both the numerator and denominator are even. Listing the factors of 10, we have 1, 2, 5, and 10. Listing the factors of 24, you see them listed there. And we can find the common factors between these numbers are really only 2. And that is the common factor and the largest one. So what is the GCF of 10 and 24? We move to reveal the answer. We see that it is in fact 2. Now to simplify it, you take that GCF and divide the numerator and the denominator both by 2 to get 5/12, or 10/24 in lowest terms is exactly 5/12. Now let's go back to the lesson. We move our screen and we can see that each of these fractions expressed in lowest terms. Obviously, the greatest common factor between 8 and 24 was 8. You can divide both the numerator and denominator by 8. And in 6/24, the greatest common factor was the 6. Divide both the numerator and denominator by 6, and you get simplified 6/24 equal to 1/4. Our second step in filling out the chart is to convert the fraction in lowest terms to a decimal and then onto a percentage. For a refresher on how to do this, let's take a look. Hocus pocus, presto changeo. To convert a fraction to a decimal or a percentage, you take the following steps. You change the fraction to a decimal by simply dividing the numerator by the denominator. Now remember, it's the numerator that becomes the dividend. The denominator becomes the divisor. Then you simply change the decimal to a percentage by multiplying it by 100 and adding a percent sign, or our shortcut, move the decimal 2 places to the right and add a percent sign. Okay, for a moment, everybody, try and convert the fraction 1/4 to a decimal and then to a fraction. Or I'm sorry, a decimal and then to a percentage. Okay, we'll reveal the answer to see all the steps somewhere here. And you see, in this case, the fraction 1/4, the denominator 4 was the divisor, the numerator 1, we add a decimal point and 2 zeros. Through long division, we get a quotient of 0.25. To change 0.25 to a percentage, we move the decimal places 2 to the right and add a percent sign. Voila, we have 25%. Now let's go back to our lesson. Take a minute and do each one of these, remembering to round to the nearest hundredth for decimals. We can see that in fact we have our decimals and our percentages. Please note that in every column our decimals must equal 1 and our percentages must equal 100. This is for your circle graph to be absolutely precise. The final step is to calculate the number of degrees for each of these activities in a teenager's day. This goes back to thinking in terms of our geometry unit, and you all remember there are 360 degrees in a circle. So to determine the number of degrees for each activity, the sleeping, the hours in school, and the stuff, you multiply 360 degrees by the appropriate decimal or percentage. So our example shows that if John spent 42% of his time, or 0.42, sleeping, what would that be? How many degrees would that be in drawing a circle graph? Take a minute, do the math. We tap here. We see that that converts to 151 degrees. You see, if you do that for each one of those, sleep, school, and stuff, you'll find you have 151 degrees for sleep, 119 degrees for school, and 90 degrees for stuff, other. You have to make sure that the degree column always totals 360 degrees. Do the necessary rounding if you're in any way off. So now it's actually time to make the circle graph. You draw or trace a circle, and then the next step is to draw a radius anywhere. You remember a radius goes from the center of the circle to an outer edge. And you can see where I've drawn that line on this one. The next thing is to use a protractor to draw an angle representing the number of degrees, 151 in this example, for the first activity. And then fill in the other segments measuring the degrees in each part or section. So what you would do is put the circle of your protractor here on the center of the circle, put the baseline here, and draw your angle reading 151 degrees at that point. You then, for your second activity, you're going to use this line as your base and measure for 119 degrees an angle along this way. And your final angle, you'll have a line that goes something like this, though I'm not doing it with a protractor now. But I remember that the final activity was stuff, which was 90 degrees. And from geometry, I remember this, in fact, is a 90-degree angle made by two perpendicular lines. So let's do this yourself and then check to see if you're correct. And yes, in fact, you get a graph that looks something like this. And if you refer back to the beginning of the video, this is exactly where we had started. 42% of an average teenager's time is spent sleeping, 33% of the time spent in school, and 25% doing stuff. Voila, we've created a circle graph. Thank you. This is Mrs. S. I hope you learned something in this lesson, and you will review it time and time again each time you need to draw a circle graph.